thumbs up once you can start seeing our PowerPoint here. Okay. Can everyone, oh, almost. Okay, so you can see it. Awesome. Okay. So do you see the full screen or do you see the presenter view?
It's just the presenter view right now, Darcie.
Oh my gosh. Okay. How's that?
Same.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, it's on. Okay, perfect. So this is Municipal Budget 101. So Kieran and I, in a very short time, are going to try and walk you through a few things. So the first part, we're just going to talk to you really quickly about the strong mayor budget process. So what does the legislation say about that? Then we're going to talk to you about the actual City of Windsor budget timeline. Then I'm going to go over the operating budget and the user fees sort of overview. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kieran, who's going to do the capital budget overview. And he's also going to talk a little bit about an acronym you've probably heard a lot about, the AMP. And then we'll go on to questions and answers. So first up, and Kieran, I can't see you because I know, but I can't see if you want to jump in at all. So I'm trying to get this so that I can actually see it. Let's see if this works. Let's try that. Okay, can everyone still see the full slideshow?
Yes.
You do. Okay, perfect. All right, awesome. So the strong mayor budget process. So this is just what the legislation says around strong mayor powers and when the mayor presents the budget and then how it works from there and what the timelines are. I do want to point out, and Kieran, you might want to say something about this as well, that just because the strong mayor powers legislation says that it like gives these directions and these timelines, it does not have to be done this way. So there are many cities in the province whose mayors have strong mayor powers and don't necessarily do it in the way that's being done in Windsor. So work with administration on the budget, create the mayor's budget. I don't want to say keep it a secret, but keep it a secret until you drop it and the time clock starts. There's a lot of cities where that's not how it's been done, despite the fact that the strong mayor powers legislation also applies to those cities. So we can talk about that later if we have time. But according to the legislation, if it's done this way, day one starts when the head of council proposes the budget, which will be December 28th for Windsor. Council then has 30 days to amend that budget through a resolution, which, Kieran, correct me if I'm wrong, only requires a majority of council to make
a majority for an amendment, a council
to amend the budget, to amend that budget.
Yeah.
Right. So then the mayor, then after that 30 days passes and all the amendments are made, mind you, that 30 days can end sooner if council agrees. So if council were to make all their amendments in 10 days and decide they were fine with that, they can shorten that 30-day time frame as well. And then the mayor has 10 days to veto any of those amendments. And we saw that happen last year with the tunnel bus. I think that was the only one. But the mayor has 10 days to do that. Then council can meet to override any of the mayor's vetoes within 15 days from then. And at the end of that 15 days, whether or not council overrides any vetoes or whether there are any vetoes, the budget is adopted. Again, any of these can be shortened. So council can amend and shorten that 30-day period. If they say all our amendments are done, we agree in under 30 days, then it just moves to the next phase. And the mayor could technically say the next day, I'm not vetoing anything, so we're moving on to the next phase, which would then not apply anymore because council wouldn't have any vetoes to think about overriding. Go ahead, Kieran. Sorry.
One quick thing. Yeah. No. Just on the override piece. So that requires a two-thirds majority of the members present at the meeting. So in our case, and there's an interesting point of discussion in there. It requires 8 votes.
Yes.
2/3, because the mayor is actually included in that calculation. There could be a conversation around whether or not the mayor should be allowed to vote yay or nay to override his own veto. That's a whole separate governance question that the province would have to deal with. But I've had more than a few governance folks, integrity commissioners and whatnot from other jurisdictions, sort of validate that that's a reasonable argument.
And that's, you'll see Kieran in the bottom of my next slide here. So that, yeah, if council wants to veto a mayor's veto or override a mayor's veto, it requires 8 of 11 councillors. So including the mayor himself, obviously, right? So, and that didn't happen when it came to the tunnel bus. Council wasn't able to get that 8 to override the mayor's veto of their initial amendment. So this is the City of Windsor budget timelines. Again, keeping in mind that they can be shortened depending on whether council agrees or the mayor decides not to veto. But the budget is coming out Monday, December 29th. Public delegations will be at the first regular council meeting after that date, which is January 12th. So you'll see I have a little bullet there that public delegations for the budget are that day, but it's not a special meeting specifically about the budget. That is also a regular council meeting where council will be discussing whatever is on their regular agenda, but while allowing delegations for the budget that specific day. And the deadline to register to delegate or to have written submissions included on the agenda, the final agenda, will be 12 p.m. on Friday preceding that meeting, which is Friday, January 9th. So 2 weeks later is the next scheduled council meeting. I think that ends up being like a special meeting though, which is only around the budget, where council will get the budget presentation from administration, and then they can debate and make any amendments at that time. Thursday the 29th is actually the final date for council to make amendments. So let's say, for example, they decide after Monday they want to meet again. They can do that, but the 29th of January is the final day based on the legislation that council could make any amendments. And then Sunday, February 8th would then be the final date for the mayor to veto amendments. And then Monday, February 23rd would be the final date for council to override any vetoes for the mayor. But again, it requires 2/3 majority. So 8 of 11, including the mayor. And Kieran's right. I think that's totally debatable, and I don't know if other municipalities do it that way or not, or if mayors have vetoed any budget amendments. So I'm not sure. Okay, so moving along, this is what so I just want to do a bit of a caveat here that we're basing everything that we're showing you today on what the 2025 budget looked like, assuming that the wheel won't be reinvented this year. I don't know if that's a safe assumption or not, but this was also a strong mayor budget, so that's all we can go on. So that's what we've used here. And so this is what the budget page in 2025 looked like when the budget was dropped on January 2nd, 2025. So for the year 2025. So you'll see a bunch of information about registering to delegate, when budget delegations will happen, some of the other timelines, and then you'll see a listing of a bunch of different documents. So you'll see on the right, there's the operating budget documents, details about that, the capital, and then the ABCs, so the agency boards and committees documents. All in all, Kieran has them up there somewhere with him, but they're about what, 30 pounds or so?
All right, that's the capital. That's the operating. Those are the two big ones.
Yeah, they weigh a lot. There's a lot of pages in there. But anyway, we're going to help you try and get through them and figure out how to not have to read every single page, because you really don't have to. I'm sure, I know councillors do, sorry, I just want to say. But depending on what you're interested in, there's no need to read every single word in all of those pages in order to really understand what's happening. So I'm going to walk through sort of if I were to get this, the first day I would see this screen, how I would go through the operating budget to find the things that I'm interested in and to figure out where to get the details for them, and to figure out potentially what I don't need to pay a lot of attention to at the beginning. So I just want to make a quick note on not recommended issues. So you'll see within these documents that will be linked on the budget page, there are 2 that reference not recommended issues related to the operating budget. Those are, it's sort of like a legacy piece. Kieran and I were talking about this. They've historically been there because council would generally have given direction to administration to come back to council when council was in charge of the budget and not just the mayor. So council would generally have given direction earlier in the year to the administration, asking them to come back with options that they could consider in order to decrease operating costs by 5 or 10%. It's gone back and forth. It used to be 10 and then it went to 5. So they would come back with these 2 documents, which contain really the same things, just a different way of presenting them. You know, giving people really scary options as to what you could do if you really wanted to cut further or to increase user fees more. Anything you want to add there about that, Kieran?
Yeah, just it's sort of embedded in the culture now. What are the cuts? And there's been so many. You know, we've talked about holding the line on taxes for years and years. It's almost a mantra that's evolved in our community for better or for worse. But what it's the consecutive years of going to zero-based budgeting has turned into the point where the only things left to cut are the major items like a community center, a library, and that's what administration is actually trying to communicate when we've sent them the direction, like, okay, can you find us another 10% of cuts? You're actually, what they're trying to say is you're down to cutting bone, it's not fat. So that's why that part of the budget almost is like, it's not worth the paper it's written on these days, because it's things that for 99% of them are just options that are totally off the table. People aren't even really considering.
So I would leave, so don't panic when you see things in there, because the not recommended pieces are not in the mayor's budget. It is not part of it. It's just sort of an appendix of things you could consider if you wanted to go deeper and cut more. And I would personally leave those to the very end because they're not relevant at the beginning when you're first looking at the budget. So this is the document that I normally would look at first. So I'm just going to go back. You'll see on the left-hand side, it's the operating budget summary of recommended issues. And this is what it looks like. So it goes sort of department or area by department and just lists really quickly every single thing that's in the budget that's recommended. So red either means that it's a cut to operating costs or services, or it's an increase in some sort of revenue or fees. So I look for the red personally first, so I can see what's being cut or who's being asked to pay more, and go through those. And oftentimes I go, so I put here the transit one, for example, from the 2025 budget. So you can just go line by line and see, oh, what are all these reds, right? And I'll talk to you about in-camera items later, so we can talk about that after. But you'll see, you know, the transit service plan. Oh, it was net, it was neutral, so cost neutral. But then you can see where they've got all the other reds. That's either a reduction or a fee increase for the most part. So what I do is go through this one. It's a shorter document, and see which ones I'm most interested in first. Kieran, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just looking at your graph, and I know you randomly selected it, but it's those are fair increases that you saw that you're seeing, which reduces the budget pressure. So we don't have to fund as much if we keep everything the same because of the fare increases in this case. So just because it could be, it's confusing accounting.
It is
language, to be honest, to wrap your mind around. So that's a good point, a good thing for you to point out, Darcie, in terms of the colors and how that impacts the
red is either a cut or asking people to pay us more money. Really, for the most part, red means one of those two things. And to figure out exactly what they mean, you have to get a little bit more into the budget detail. But this is the short document where you can find everything. I highlight the ones I'm interested in, and then I move on to this document, so I can see a little bit more about the things that I'm most interested in. Just a note on in-camera items. So in that, you know, the summary I showed you, it's usually Appendix B. You'll see a lot of items called in-camera items. This one has a 0, you know, next to it, but a lot of them do have dollar amounts, but you're not allowed to know what it is. You can at least know through this document where it falls, like under what department. So is it transit, for example? Is it parks and rec? You'll be able to know that. And you can flag any in-camera items that are big numbers, for example, that you're really interested in. I could think we can ask Kieran at some point how the public eventually figures out what they are, but it remains a secret for quite some time, unless, of course, like from last year, the example around the tunnel bus, I believe that first was an in-camera item in the agenda. In-camera means it's in a meeting that they call in-camera. So in-camera meetings are ones where they're using an exception under the Municipal Act. There's a number of exceptions you can use to have a meeting that is not open to the public, and that almost doesn't need to be, the details of which anyway, don't need to be reported to the public. The media can't go into that meeting. So there are a bunch of exceptions that can be used to have an in-camera meeting. I have I'm not going to go on my whole rant about those, but there are exceptions you can use to say, well, there's a legal thing here, or it's like a union negotiation, for example, or we're talking about personal information about an identifiable individual. So negotiations, for example, those types of things, there's specific exceptions that the municipality and council use in order to have a meeting behind closed doors, essentially. So those line items are ones where they're going to meet and talk about it outside of public view, right? And then when you go into the budget detail that I'm going to show you, you'll see a bunch of blank pages that say this. So they're just placeholders for these items that are on the list that you're not allowed to know about because of these exceptions that they're using. Okay, so Kieran's laughing because we have a lot of debates about this. So the operating budget executive summary. So that's where you can find more information about some of these sort of short snippets here that you're interested in. So you'll look at this, see which ones you're interested in. Where's the big red numbers? What am I interested in? Then you can go to the executive summary, which has a number of different parts. The ones that I'm usually most interested in are increased revenue and operating efficiencies, inflation mitigation reductions, and increases to base operating budgets, because those are where the big changes are happening that are, I guess, within the control of council, in my view. So A and B almost always get through, and there's nothing, usually nothing super, I would say, I don't know, contentious or political about those. It's like things we absolutely have to pay these things. It's almost totally out of the municipality's hands. But C, D, and E is where some of the debatable things come into play. Then you'll also, I have this one struck out here from 25 because that one was a section related to when council was allowed to have a say about the budget. They had that finance committee last year where they all met and then made a bunch of recommendations related to the budget, and those went in that section, but they didn't, that wasn't a thing that happened this year. So that one I struck out, so you don't need to look for that this time. And then there's the items related to ABCs. A lot of those are totally out of the municipality's hands. That they include things like the health unit was IRCA, right, Kieran?
Yep.
Yeah, and so really they have to say yes to most of those, and none of them this year I think are asking for a lot, but I could be wrong. Can they say no?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
It's debatable.
Yeah, believe even IRCA, we funded less than what was requested. So it's the health unit that happens to be the one that we really can't say no to. You can make up any number you want there, but everybody else sort of still the final decision rests with council.
You'll be happy to know that the health unit asked only for 1%, I believe, this year. So yeah, that's my understanding. Anyway, and then so sections I and J include other city department reduction options. So I think that's even further than the not recommended ones. And J is ones that we'd really like to have this, but you're probably not going to do it. But here's some things we'd like you to do. Is that correct, Kieran? Pretty much.
Well, I look, and I enjoy reading those two sections. You know, like so those are where you might find some reasonable reductions that just aren't being recommended. And the J is where you see I think the greatest opportunities for things that we could, if we had additional resources, these are the things that we would do, or at least in administration's mind would make the most sense for you to do. So that's always an interesting section for me.
And those aren't in the recommended, but
No.
they're things they think we should do.
Yeah.
Right. And I imagine in the past, the IT investments that would have been in there, right? Like we need to, many years ago, like years and years ago.
The IT investments would have been in would have been in J for a long time, for many years, as well as you know, there's different folks from all ends of like the fiscal hawkishness spectrum that are within administration as well. That's where you can see where the interesting internal debates are actually happening in the I and the J sections.
Okay, I'm going to try and speed it up, but this is what, so the executive summary that you would go to looks like. And so for each of those sections, any of the items that you're interested in, you can find them here with a sort of a larger summary of what they are. Now there's another document I'll show you, which is like major detail on each of these items, but this is another quick place that you can go to see each of those either increases or decreases, or fee increases or decreases, line by line, but with a bigger summary than just one straight title. So you can find a lot of information here in this document. So you would just go through and find the ones that you were interested in within this document and be able to get more detailed information about them. So here's just a really good example. Again, I just wanted to point out, if you look straight at this document, that the numbers that are in black are the ones where we'll be actually spending more. And the numbers that are in red are, well, we'll either be spending more or reducing user fees. I said that because I don't think that part's actually a possibility. I think that's unlikely, but you never know. So it's either we'll be spending more money or making investments, or reducing user fees. And the red numbers are where we will be. And so I've shown you the ones that were from the initial page I showed you related to the UPass revenue. So that's the UPass fee increase. So you can see more information about them there. So again, the red is we're either increasing fees or we're cutting operating funding. What I also like is at the end of each section, for the subsection, it'll tell you the total amount of either cuts or revenue increases, right? So $16 million either in cuts or revenue or fee increases in this section alone last year. So this is the other document called the budget issue detail. And so if you wanted to go even further, so you want even more information about what is the rationale behind this, you know, all of that, what's the background, what's the rationale, why are they saying this is something we should do or shouldn't do, or this is where you'll find it. So you go into the budget issue detail and you can find any one of those items with a lot more detail and whether it's recommended and why. So this is a good one for the things you're really interested to find out. Why are they saying this? And I still to this day refer back to 2025 budget issue details related to stuff I'm still annoyed about, for example, and go back to what was said in this document, you know, and sometimes point out where it seems things have changed, things like that. So this is, and I will tell you, I had to go to the Wayback Machine to get this because it will disappear off of the city's website as soon as the budget is passed. So if you want a copy of this, don't expect it to still be there like a month or two after the budget is passed. It will be replaced with the final budget, and you may or may not be able to use the Wayback Machine to get that document again. So download it as soon as it comes out and save it if you want to ever refer back to it.
Darcie, one thing I think you should hit on,
yes?
if you don't mind, if you go back to the previous slide, the coding and how the coding there on the left helps you to find the
page numbers,
the detail piece that you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
The document.
So tell me about that, because I never used that. I just looked through. And
okay, so you see that second column by the yellow band. So
where
that
it's 60 through 28. That's the page number.
So
okay.
You know, so take for example, you wanna understand more about the UPass issue. You'll go into the budget, this one. this big thick one that I showed you a minute
But you
ago.
guys won't print it out though. You'll
Yeah,
have it on
I know,
you'll have it
in
on.
the PDF version. You'll find it on. You'll find
Yeah.
that issue. There's 2 or 3 pages describing exactly what that issue, what's gone into that issue from both a financial perspective as well as operational impact. You'll find that on page 60. So that's
Right.
again, that's how these pieces, these documents work in tandem, work together, and how you can find the information that you're looking for.
And so, yeah, so this would be on the corresponding page that you would see here. So that's where I found this. Okay, so really quickly, the other document, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kieran, is you'll find the user fee schedule. So that is where you'll find every fee that's being increased or decreased line by line. And I just keyword search it for the things I'm most interested in personally. And then if I have time, I'll go back and read the entire thing. But if there's certain things you're interested in, fees around, so I have transit as an example here. It tells you whether fares are going up and by how much. That is in that, the document looks like this. It's just line by line. What's the category? What's the fee? And you can find the 2025 number. So this will switch. It's not 2024 to 25. It'll be 25 to 2026. What's interesting though about this document here is you'll see the change over prior year is just in dollar amounts in this document. That is a change from the years before. In prior years, it would also give you the percent increase. So here I have what you won't find in the budget. And you may, if you want to, calculate it yourself. But so for example, in here, you won't find the percent increase anymore unless they put it back in. So in 25, they removed that. So you won't be able to know just by looking at it by what percentage they're increasing transit fees or recreation fees or, I don't know, arena fees, what have you. You'll unfortunately have to make this a Excel sheet. We'll do that for you. I commit to, I will do this for everyone so that they'll know what the percentage increase is if that column is not there. And so this is another note on what you won't find in the budget. So what I think about the budget that is missing is you won't find what the overall reduction is year over year by division and department. So all you'll find is line by line the increases or decreases for various things, but you won't find what the overall decrease is. So when I went to look at the final budget that was passed in 2025, which came out, a month or two, was published a month or two later after all of the deliberations and the vetoes, I saw that the reduction, for example, in the transit budget, whether that be through fare increases or operating cost reductions or other efficiencies, cost savings they found, was actually 19.84%. But if you look at the documents that were provided to the public and to council in advance of the budget being finalized, that total number really wasn't there. So you couldn't compare what was the previous year's budget to what, with all of the things they're talking about, what's the percent difference in the decrease or increase. So you can calculate that if you want to. I would use the final 2025 budget. It might be a little bit difficult. I'm not going to commit to doing that one for you, but I will do my best. But anyway, I'll do it for the user fees 100%. I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it now over to Kieran, who's going to talk about the cap. No, I have no idea why those percentages were omitted from the budget. You'll have to, I don't know, Kieran, do you know why they would have taken that line?
I don't want to speculate too much, but I would acknowledge that sometimes maybe those decisions are political. Sometimes maybe there's just like, it's based on the page. And maybe the public, it's just sort of a what do we think that the public is really interested in understanding. I don't always want to ascribe the most negative motive to behind something that may, that's a reasonable question. But anyway, by the way, Darcie, are you committing to doing all of the user fee deltas like that, or just transit?
I'm gonna try. Well, I'm definitely gonna do transit and recreation and parks and recreation.
All right.
I'll definitely.
I'll find that very handy. I'll just say that. So appreciate that.
No,
okay,
if it's not there, I will 100% do it. Yeah, I'm gonna export it into an Excel, a CSV, and I'm gonna take it's easy enough once I do that to like
Okay.
do a column that calculates the difference.
Okay, I got you. You covered
Yeah.
a lot of ground there, so good job.
Okay, I
on the
tried.
capital side.
Just before, sorry, Kieran, just before
Yeah.
we switch over to capital, I'm going to do a quick reminder and then clear some of the questions in the queue. So for folks who haven't asked a question yet, if you do have a question, just a reminder, in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little dot grid. You can press the Q&A button there and submit questions. You also have the raise hand feature, which will hold till the end. I just wanted to, there's one question in the queue that hasn't gotten answered yet, which I think is good just to answer before we go into capital, which is not budget related specifically, but which piece of legislation defines mayoral strong powers? Is it in the Municipal Act?
I believe it is.
It's in the Municipal Act.
And in Toronto's case, it would have had to have been in the Toronto Act. because
It
it's
is
got
in the
its own
Municipal
standalone
Act.
feature. Yeah.
Just to confirm, it is.
Okay.
Great. Okay, we can go forward.
Okay, so on the capital side, we're constantly building the city. So at any given time, and you'll see in the numbers here, actually on this slide that you see in front of you right now, over the next 10 years, we're going to do $2.244 billion of capital investments in the city of Windsor. And it includes everything from road, sewers, parks, you name it. Even some other capital investments include fleet purchases and all of the different things that we need to buy physical assets or hard infrastructure to be able to for the city to function from a civil engineering standpoint, or to undertake the equipment that we require in order to be able to undertake the operational things that we need to do across the city. So what you see here, one of the things a few things I want to do to be able to unpack how we look at the capital budget is, and for folks to be able to understand a little better, is like, we're going to start with where does the money come from? So you see on this chart, summary of recommended capital budget funding source allocation. So in that first blue box under service sustainability investments, service sustainability investment is the first thing. That's a number of different sort of funds that we have, sort of money we have socked away into different pots that are there to fund different aspects of capital services. One of them is the asset management plan, which is essentially a levy that we bake into the tax base, but that's utilized only for capital infrastructure investments to support maintaining current assets. There's other funds that also help to fund the service sustainability investments. You see dedicated reserves. So there's what would fall into that. Development charges, the parking reserve. There's another one. We have the building permit reserve fund as well. Some of those reserve funds are specifically dedicated to funding operations that are specific to that service area. So that's another funding source for capital investments. The sewer surcharge. Sometimes there's grants, and then the Canada Community Building Fund. That's actually administered by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario in Ontario, and is another funding source for a variety of different capital projects that we basically have to apply for through like a granting process. I'm going to just skip to the next one because I want to. Do you want to go to the next slide, Darcie? Okay, so we also major funding categories. So oftentimes, and there's a slide that I left out, but you probably heard the mayor in his announcement say, this year we're making unprecedented investments in roads and sewers. So what you see here is a breakdown by category of the different types of capital investments that we're making across the city in any given year. You see it built over a timeline at the top there. So I know the font's pretty small. I'm having trouble reading it myself. But it says 2025, and then you actually do get a percentage of budget there. So there is a bit of a breakdown metric for you in this table. But it shows you over the years what is currently being planned for in the 10-year capital budget. That's something really important to understand. It is a document that, although the investments are going to be approved for the year in front of us, they also, because capital investments, the major ones tend to be phased in over a number of years. The document looks at has a 10-year horizon to it, which lends to it a certain amount of fluidity. But at the same time, there's certain things that once it's in there and once we start, most of the time, Walker Road notwithstanding, it's something that we would sort of see through to the end once we really get it started. Next slide. Recommended capital budget. So this is where what I wanted, similar to what Darcie showed you in terms of how the two documents, the executive summary document of the operating plan or operating budget works with the budget detail. This is, I want to the capital documents are sort of jammed together, but functions they're sort of broken down chapter wise similarly. So here you see just some categories that we have with respect to a further level of categories of the types of investments that we make. So non-discretionary investments or pre-commitments. So when you see something like that in the capital budget, a pre-commitment or non-discretionary might be something like we're in the middle of a sewer project that we started. That we started in 2024, and we're going to continue in 2025. We can't leave it half done. It's non-discretionary. It's moving forward. So that's money that's not up for debate. That's happening. Service sustainability is another. This is a commitment that we've made in terms of something that's going to be an improvement. Maybe it's, for example, I think University Avenue was in service sustainability for a long time. We're going to improve that roadway. We recognize that there's capital investments that need to happen in order to address the challenges along that corridor. So, and then it's sort of water management infrastructure that goes along with all of that, and all of the other pieces, the civil engineering pieces that go along with capital infrastructure investments. That's what you're seeing there. So you want to go to the next one, Darcie, because I want to be mindful of folks this time, and I think the really important part is coming up. Why don't we skip this one and we'll go to the next?
Okay. This one too?
Yep. Okay. So I just talked about the example that Darcie used in the operating budget executive summary and how that relates to the budget detail document. At the beginning of the capital document, assuming everything is laid out the same way it has, in the first sort of 20, 30 pages of it, you'll see pages and pages of the lines that you're seeing in front of you right here. And each one of these relates to, you see the page number, so that relates to the page in the capital document where you'll see the full explanation of that particular capital project. But if you're somebody like Councillor Marignani, for example, who only cares about the capital investments that are going to happen in his ward, what he's going to do is he's going to open up the capital book and start looking for stuff that's in Ward 7. And, you know, whatever else happens, I don't care about any of that. What's happening in Ward 7, what's scheduled in Ward 7. And he'll start highlighting, okay, that's in Ward 7, that's in Ward 7. He'll go to, let's see, I think I have one queued up, for example. There we go. Parks and Recreation, relocation of Sandpoint Beach. Hobby horse of Angela's been doing a great job advocating on this issue. I got to give him that for sure. But this is a good example. So if you go back, at the top you see a screenshot of what I pulled from the early section of the capital document, where it highlights in the parks section that exact project. So on page 117, this is what you're going to see. And what you see here, if you go down to this section where it's the year by year, and this is what Councillor Marignani is, I think, I don't want to speak for him, but it's been raising, I've heard him say it many times, is frustrated that the funding has not been allocated for Sandpoint Beach to go forward until 2029. So the project is there, and at a high level, we know what we want to do, we know what it's going to cost, but the money isn't going to be there until 2025, until 2029. So that's and that's always the challenge in everything, you know, in municipal infrastructure. Time and money. How much money do you have? What are the number of projects that you need to do, and how do you schedule and prioritize those projects given those resources that you have? So in this case, and obviously, there was a tragedy that we're all very aware of. That's really raised the importance of dealing with what's happening at Sandpoint Beach. We have I guess what would be fair to say, temporary solution in place, and this is the capital project that currently is being proposed. And is on the books. I'm not sure if that council will have to deal with that in the upcoming, and I'm not sure what's in the 2026 budget as it relates to this. But I thought this was a project that most people would be aware of, and that's why. And plus, I knew Angela was going to be here, so I wanted to talk about this and just sort of help folks understand. Darcie, if you could go back, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Within So you see though that this is again in the executive summary portion of the capital budget book. You see roads and infrastructure, and then further down there's a section that starts sewer infrastructure, and then there's other sections that deal with other investments. Parks, as I said, is another full investment category, and there's hundreds, literally hundreds of projects that on any given year, the city of Windsor is involved in over 500 capital projects across the city. I'm sure people would have felt the pain of the construction that we've had this year, and I do apologize for that. But the effort to build the city is never ever going to stop. We will always have work to do to either repair or renew capital infrastructure that falls within our purview. And we need to do that in order to maintain those assets and be able to have the city function properly. I'm going to touch on one more thing, and that is the asset management plan. So you see the asset management plan as it appears in the operating budget, because those are the funds that are required in order for us to be able, from an operational standpoint, to continue to have to be able to understand the different assets that we need to be assessing and quote unquote managing, if you will. The rationale behind AMP. If we don't build into, and the next slide is, I think, really illuminating actually. That bar on the right-hand side, the total cost of ownership. So look at that. Anything that we invest in, that we purchase, or that we build, 20% of those costs are invested in the actual construction of that thing, whether it's a building, a road, sidewalk, park infrastructure, you name it. The rest of it, 80% of the cost of that asset is in the operation of it, or the utilization of it, maintenance of it, and then that last end of the blue graph is the tear down of it. If you see the flow chart, the circle, so plan, design, construct, that's the life cycle of these assets. So what we did a number of years ago, we finally actually put a financial plan in place. It was in 2019, the asset management plan, to be able to, because we did an assessment of all of the assets, of a great number of assets, $6 billion worth of assets. I think that's the next slide, Darcie. Okay, hold on, just hold there for a second. We assessed $6 billion worth of assets across the city. We came up with a classification for of the condition of all of those assets. The dark green is very good, all the way to very poor. Out of the $6 billion that we evaluated in 2019, and that wasn't even half of them, we found that nearly $1 billion worth of assets, and most of them were in the roads and sewers category, were either poor or in very poor condition. People probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that. So that is a massive number. So council realized, to its credit, we need to have a financial plan in place in order to be able to get caught up. So we set administration with direction to come back with that plan in order for us to be able to get caught up and fix these things that are falling apart. Council in 2019 approved the plan, which was and so this is where you might have heard in the budget conversation when we start talking about the tax increase. Well, what about AMP? We got to fund AMP. AMP's got to be a part of anything that's related to the tax increase. So we start with, we created a 6-year plan where council has to start, rather than, if you wanted to start at 0 but still fund AMP, you have to have at least it started with 1.18% increase to be able to fund AMP, and maybe everything else stays at 0. So your new 0 is, the way we used to say, is 1.18 or 1.17. Then we realized a couple of years into it that even though we were funding some of those assets, we were still having some real problems in the residential areas, funding roads that were falling apart in neighborhoods. Council decided they wanted to do something about that, so we decided to put another 0.25% into the asset management plan, specifically dedicated to residential roads. So if you've seen some roads in neighborhoods that either you live in or that you that are neighborhoods that you're familiar with or whatnot, you suddenly are seeing a mill and pave happen or whatnot, that is most likely due to council making that decision to augment the asset management plan with a local road improvement, let's call it, feature to it. That's improved infrastructure. I know in my ward there's roads that I know for a fact would never have been resurfaced and hadn't been resurfaced for decades. were it not for these funds being made available. So I think that that was a really good decision of council to add the local road improvement, but also even just the asset management plan. And the thing that's really important to understand around the asset management plan is that it works along a time spectrum. So the way that because those assets are continuing to age in real time. So the number that they came up with in terms of how much you need to fund in order to create the revenue, generate the revenue to sustain those assets or to fix those assets, has to be done over a certain period of time. Otherwise, those assets are going to fall into even worse disrepair. And if something, there's this sort of civil engineers will talk about when something's sort of like just kind of bad, maybe poor, the difference between fixing something that's poor versus very poor is enormous. There's a sort of a multiplier there. You never want to allow the assets to fall into very poor condition because it costs you, I'm just going to throw a number out there, 10 times more to fix it than if you fixed it when it was still in poor condition and you brought it up to fair. So again, just as a part of that discussion around asset management, it's a constant part of the conversation, and there's a spectrum of views on council around whether or not this is a good idea or not. I'm a very strong proponent of this because what I know is if we don't fund it, all of those things that we thought in terms of the poor condition of our roadways and other assets that we have in our community, for example, playground infrastructure, we've been in situations when I first arrived on council where we had to remove playgrounds because they were literally falling apart, and we didn't have funding in the budget for that playground to be replaced for another 4 or 5 years. Imagine you live in a neighborhood, you bring your child to play in whatever the neighborhood playground is, and the next day the slide's not there. You call your counselor, it won't be there for another 5 years. Never want to be in that situation. So this idea of maintaining our assets is a really important part of the budget conversation, because if we don't, the city falls apart. People won't want to live here because the roads are too bad, or the parks are in terrible condition, or all of the different things, buildings falling apart. People can't use facilities because plaster's literally falling off the wall or whatever it might be. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that's helped folks. Oh, there you go. So there's the pie chart that shows that was in 2019, those $6 billion worth of assets. So, again, there's a lot of green there and even the yellow, but that poor, very poor, that represents, I think in this case, that was in 2019, almost $900 million worth of assets. And, one of the things that we do see oftentimes as a chart that we show the community when we start talking about, the value that 0% tax increases has brought to the community, this is the cost of it. So we can have the conversation around whether or not 0% is the right or wrong thing to do, but there's no magic in terms of if you don't pay for certain things that you're supposed to maintain, something bad is going to happen. What you see on that pie chart is the bad thing that happens. That is the direct consequence. Somebody else might argue, well, we made record investments in capital. You did, but did you make record investments in roads and sewers? I'm not so sure that that's the case. So I'll leave it there, and we'll open it up for questions.
Awesome. And we do actually have quite a few, and I will go in order. I know some folks as well who are in the queue have submitted a couple, so we'll alternate. Ashley does have a double question here. Are there any municipalities you would say have strong budgets in terms of transparency? So harkening back when we're talking about department changes, percentage change, as well as ease of understanding. Would the council and the mayor be open to examples to model after?
Oh,
That's
can I have this one,
yeah.
Kieran?
Absolutely.
jump ball on this one.
Yes, there are lots of amazing examples of budgets that are really a lot easier to understand. And you'll note, I don't know if people heard, but the C.D. Howe Institute, for example, gave the city of Windsor an F in terms of its budgeting and reporting at the end of the year, partially because the way they show you this budget and then the way they show you the final budget and then the financial statements that happen at the end of the year aren't really comparable. So it's hard to use their financial statements to go back and see, what's the difference between the end of year financial statements versus what was shown to us as the public at the beginning of the year. That's just one problem. But the way that they budget in general, so when you see the budget again, all you see is what's going up or down. those are really the only line items that you get to see in the operating budget instead of the whole picture. You also don't really get a picture when you see the final budget of what value you're getting for the dollar. So you'll see a lot of like FTEs and departments and operating costs by department, and it's hard to make sense of what does that actually mean for me as someone who pays taxes, and what am I getting for that money. So if you just Google municipal service-based budget, you'll find a ton of really great examples. They also, a lot of times when they're doing their budgets, other municipalities, and I can send some to Josh, I'll look some up off the top of my head. I can't think of any specific that you should look at, but you'll often see that they tie their budgets when they're presenting them to the strategic priorities that they as a council have set for the 4 or 5 year term. So we're making this investment, or we're making these changes because they relate to like the strategic priority. So you know what the priorities are, and you can see the things that they're doing tied directly to those things. The other thing that I'm a huge advocate of at this point is multi-year budgeting. So a lot of municipalities aren't doing this annual sort of theater around how much are we increasing or decreasing our taxes every single year. Instead, they're doing what's called multi-year budgets, which they do tweak a little bit over the time frame, but generally they decide, you know what, we're going to set our budget for the next 3 years. So taxpayers have predictability of what the tax rate will be. Businesses in our community have predictability about that. And we don't have administration running around doing this every single year. They actually have time and predictability within their own administration in order to plan, make changes, find improvements, find efficiencies, do things like quality improvement. So it opens up more time for them. It's a lot more efficient of a way to do a budget, in my opinion. I don't know if Kieran has anything to say. I don't want to go on too long.
Darcie's looked into this a whole lot more than I have. I'm the guy that's just responding to the process that's put in front of me. So I'll just say this: it's been tweaked and almost in some respects totally revamped over my 7. This is now will be my 8th budget, I guess. So it hasn't been exactly the same. It's been somewhat the same, and then this year's been a bit different just because I'm literally going to get the budget, or the rest of the council will get the budget the same day. The public will, which I think is, maybe that's the right way to do it. I don't know. Doesn't feel right to me.
Our next question comes from Wayne. Can we identify by interpolating between the capital budget documents what capital expenditures are being requested by a specific department versus a specific ward? So for example, the police department is requesting 12 new cruisers.
Yeah, so that's the year-long or the 10-month-long process that is the budget. So and that is that's again controlled by the mayor. Everybody understands that. But once sort of the mayor, or previously as Darcie was saying, council would provide direction to high level around what the general level of expectation is in terms of where we might land with respect to potential tax increase, the things that we might or decrease or zero. And then understanding the different quote budget pressures, whether on the operating or on the capital side for any of the departments. Those are the conversations that are happening. So it's and as a councillor myself, I have this running joke. Anytime I'm talking to the mayor or any of the high-ranking city officials, you're going to hear me say Walker Road, you're going to hear me say 6th Concession, you're going to hear me say Howard Avenue. And those are some of the capital priorities that I know are in my ward. So those are conversations that are happening all the time. And I think, frankly, it's if you want to use the term lobbying, everybody, whether it's an agency, whether it's a councillor, and perhaps members of the community, there is an ongoing lobbying process with all of the people who are involved in the decision making around capital expenditures. So it's a good question. I know the answer is I'm saying everybody's doing it all the time, but that literally is the answer. There's no and then frankly, what happens behind that administrative curtain, how they actually make the sausages once they get the direction and the input. I know that they have their battles internally as well around the different priorities, whether they land in the operational or capital universe. I'd love to one of these days be a fly on the wall for one of those conversations where different high-level or mid-level administrators are having those frank conversations about what the city should be utilizing resources for. But yeah, we all have our line of sight on it.
And especially too, even in speaking on behalf of the other folks in the webinar, even sessions like today illuminate at least some aspect of that process too. So we're really, really grateful for that. The next question we have is, with a series of strong mayor hold the line budgets, are we at risk of needing a new AMP, or is the current one updated?
There's going to, well, there is, we did just go through an AMP process again, where we essentially in 2025, where we evaluated a bunch of new assets that we hadn't evaluated. For example, one of the things we didn't look at, a bit of a controversial item from last term, streetlights. And so we didn't, so you think about a fundamental piece of civic infrastructure, and we're not accounting for what the life cycle costs of that is, what the replacement cost of it is when we're building that infrastructure. And that's one of the things that came up in the controversial debate around decorative street lights, was once that infrastructure is in place, it becomes the municipality's responsibility to replace like for like. So without, we had to actually create funds. We used a budget stabilization reserve funds to deal with crumbling infrastructure in South Windsor, because we didn't have the funding created to be able to replace that infrastructure, or built into our capital plan to replace infrastructure when it was falling apart. It was actually, as much as it was a tough debate, it was really illuminating for, I think, folks on council at the time. We have to deal with this issue of our assets and manage them appropriately, in order to be able to not to have emergency debates because of crucial and just basic piece of civic infrastructure is about to become a safety issue for folks. So it's that debate is ongoing around the best way for us to manage those assets. Even so, there's 10 billion beyond the 6 billion that I just showed you today, and I'm sure there's more. It's kind of staggering when to think about all of the different things that the municipality has stewardship over. But you just have to look out your front door, and 3/4 of what you would just see in your regular field of view is under the stewardship of the city or the town or wherever it is that you live in. So it's I'm starting to become less and less surprised to seeing the full scope of all the things that we have responsibility over.
On the subject of that stewardship, Judith has a question. Are the 4,000 plus units in the Windsor Essex community housing portfolio included in the AMP, and how is that capital requirement met? Yeah, so I'm not sure that they've been necessarily included in the AMP, but we did get $160 million. So I guess I'm saying no, it hasn't been. We got $160 million out of repair and renew funds from the federal government. This is going back last term. I forget exactly when those funds were allocated. So the funding and there's been a lot of great work that's happened at the Community Housing Corporation over the last couple of years in particular, where that money has finally started making it out the door, quote unquote, not to use a pun there, but we are doing a lot of work, or Community Housing Corporation is doing a tremendous amount of work restoring its assets. One of the challenges there, because of the nature of the service that's provided there, the units, when they get to a certain point, especially when they become vacated, are in really bad condition. They typically are. They cost a lot to bring back. So that's why there was a huge amount of money. $160 million was provided to the city in order to be able to deal with that. Then you get into the challenge of actually doing that work and choosing the projects that you're going to undertake to improve the units and get the most value for money out of that. It's happening now, and so that's happening outside of the AMP framework. Largely because there's already dedicated dollars to deal with that issue. And further, and I think almost we could have our own seminar on the subject of the AMP today. But next question is, given Kieran's explanation of the life cycle of assets, what does the number in the capital budget reflect? The build or the entire life cycle cost of the asset?
Technically, any new capital infrastructure should have that sort of reflected in the capital piece, along with an operational component. So this is sometimes you'll hear the say, capital and operating, ne'er shall the two sort of, there's like an iron curtain that's in between the two, but they do have to work in tandem. We build something. There's an operational piece sometimes that is built into the maintenance of it in some ways, like take our community centers. there's a maintenance budget in the operating budget of a community center, as for example. But the major pieces of infrastructure related to that building, just using that facility as an example, would fall into an asset management plan, and would be funded, those repairs, major repairs, let's say a roof replacement, an ice rink that failed that we had to replace, or some other major capital investment of something that we currently is a service that we're already delivering. We would have that embedded in. We would fund those repairs through the asset management plan.
Trevor, if I could just jump in, because I want to clarify too,
Of
because
course.
Kieran, we've been talking a lot about this. So Kieran, if I'm looking at the capital budget, the 10-year, and there's something new on a line in there that you're building, the maintenance of that isn't built into the cost of that there, is it? No.
Well, technically it should be, and again,
Yeah.
it's built into the asset management plan levy. So like
Right, but not in the capital budget we're
No, you're
looking
right.
at, right?
You're right.
Like no, that's good to know. And so the other question is, if we're redoing, like say we're putting a new roof on something, which is, so say we built an arena and the initial build cost was in the capital budget, but we assumed we wouldn't have to put a roof on for 10 more years. So the roof's not there. The roof would then appear at some point in the capital budget as another project, would it not?
It would, but
Yeah.
we would have through the
But
asset
you've
management
planned for
plan
it.
levy,
Yes.
that's what
Yeah.
you want to call it. We built
Yeah.
the fiscal capacity in order to deal with that, right?
Right.
So,
Yep.
so you're right. You're not going to see it sort of in the you're not going you'll see it actually. So in the capital project itself, if you start looking at the year by year of it, you'll see the funding source. It'll say asset management plan, or that's the fund that is funding that project. But in the original build, you're not going to see, oh, we're using asset management money to build a certain thing. We're generating asset management plan funds through the tax levy to be able to fund the maintenance of those assets that we currently own.
That makes sense.
So our next question actually steers back towards, working with local agencies. Other cities like London often do a budgeting process where agencies start a conversation around cost per user. Example, it costs the average taxpayer 20 cents to run the local museum, etc. Why does Windsor not take this approach? I think taxpayers should understand the value for dollar in that way.
I love that approach, and I think some municipalities do it not only for like the agency of the local museum, but for all the services. So that service-based budget, that service-based budgeting that I was talking about, will tell you like each person pays this much toward this specific service, or this proportion of your tax dollars go towards this specific thing, to help you see like how much you're really paying to get what value or service. I don't know why we don't take that approach, because it's a really good one. And then if you combine that with the multi-year budgeting, which is what London also does, so they, I think, do 2, 3 or 4 year budgeting, you can actually start that process with like real community engagement and around what residents' priorities are. Right. And then as you're building your budget and looking at those numbers, you can see where you're off. So if say the whole community tells you that their biggest priority is, let's say it's libraries, I'm just as an example, and then you look at your budget and you've created in a way where it's a service-based budget, and you know what percent of things is funding what, you could see, oh my gosh, we're spending a way bigger proportion of our money on give me something random, Kieran, like I don't know, something that's not libraries, and you can look at it and you can see a huge disconnect. Sure. Yeah, and you could see a huge disconnect between, the term, show me your budget and I'll tell you your priorities, something like that. So if you do it this way, you can actually see the difference in funding between services. And if the community has told you something is a very high priority compared to something else, and then you look at your budget and see, oh wow, we're totally off on those, that's how you know how to make those shifts. Anyway, that's all I'll say.
I could just add to that. There are some agencies, IRCA, as for example, will show as a part of their annual budget process. It's a metric they always show. This is the cost for all of the IRCA services per resident in the city across Windsor and Essex County. There's a few others that sort of break it down like that. You can look at the financials of the Windsor Public Library. It'll, I have a good sense of what the macro number is. So when I see, oh, that's a $10 million a year operation, I know where that falls on the spectrum. So I think that's a really good way to break the number down to say, okay, well, per resident, this is what you're putting in for your library service. They do break it down. You'll see like a pie chart in some of the budget documents that'll break the operational services down into like larger categories, but to get down to that maybe finer level is yeah, I think, and I don't think it would take much to be able to break those numbers down and put that in front of people.
Darcie, the next question goes back to your conversation about not recommended items. You said it's something we should ignore, but are those not things the various departments have requested? And shouldn't we be paying attention to the requests departments make that either administration, the mayor, or the council have said no to?
You are right. So you've made a good point. So I'm looking at the not recommended budget issues from 2024 here in 2025. The vast majority of them are cuts in services or increases in fees. But if you did want to look at those, again, I think keeping in mind that based on the fact that the mayor had made his requests to administration that we keep the budget at 0%, it's highly unlikely that any of these requests for additional funding from departments are going to make their way into the budget after the mayor has tabled his budget. I'd say that's unlikely, but in not recommended, administration's not even recommending them in this one. So there is that portion of the budget where it's additional asks that administration has put in for people to look at, and that's not the not recommended. So those are the ones Kieran was mentioning. And then there's specifically not recommended. So it's, so I know it's a little bit confusing, but for the most part, the not recommended are cuts, big ones.
The next question coming over the plate, a little bit of a hot ball. Is the city positioning itself for growth with a zero tax increase budget? The person asking the question would think not.
Well, let me start. No, I don't think so. Look, what you're going to hear is that we're making unprecedented investments in some capital pieces, and that's true. The city's more than roads and sewers, although, as I was saying, it's a massively important part of building a city, maintaining a city, and living in a city. But, you know, in a city that's growing, despite decreases in ridership, transit demand is at all-time highs. We're probably going to see cuts. I haven't seen the budget, but I would assume that if you're trying to get to zero and the police are going to get an increase and fire is going to get an increase and maybe ambulance and asset management is going to get funded, the first place I think you're going to see cuts are probably parks and probably in transit. And are those things that we should be cutting in the context of a city that's growing despite the economic challenges that we're facing? I don't think so. Other social services, the expansion of some of those services where we have opportunities to do that, that's not happening. And I think that that's leaving a lot of folks behind. And that's to Darcie's point. You are who your budget says you are. So we're all about roads and sewers, and then that's the mayor's vision. But to be so firmly committed to zero in this time, understanding the economic circumstances that we're all facing, we're also facing growth, and I think there's a need for investments for the municipality to make to help support people better than we're able to right now.
Certainly concur, and to your point you said earlier, Kieran, you know, the city is constantly building. That doesn't happen with zero whatsoever. The next question, I work with a community organization that has a long-term financial sustainability plan. Does the city ever see community or service club funded projects become a municipal responsibility over time? If so, how does the council plan for those future costs?
I guess it would depend. There's certain services that we can take on. There's others that, you know, it just maybe isn't the municipality isn't the appropriate agency in order to be able to continue to be able to deliver a service, albeit important and impactful. It's just, you know, at what point is the municipality reach a point of it can't just do all the things that all other levels of government aren't able to do. So they're all reasonable conversations. I don't know if there was a specific service or thing that you had in mind, but I think that that's sort of a case by case basis where sometimes council will fill the gap. We have done that in housing, for example. We've seen situations where not for profit agencies running a housing project weren't able to continue because of turnover in the board, administrative challenges, some real serious problems, but the housing still remains and people still need to be housed, and somebody needs to run that facility, and the city or the housing corporate stepped in to be able to take on that role in sort of an emergency circumstance. So that happens on a, I guess, fairly, I shouldn't say regular basis, but as need be. But certainly, again, even me, the bleeding heart on council, there is a limit to how much of that work that we can undertake.
And this is actually going to be our last question. Is there a recommended formula for city capital budgets that accounts for funding and maintaining infrastructure, parks, housing, etc.?
I'm sorry, it was. Could you just repeat one more time?
Yep, no problem. Is there a recommended formula for city capital budgets that accounts for funding and maintaining infrastructure, parks, housing, etc.?
I wish. I wish it was as easy as a formula, right? And we just, okay, this is what we have, and just input data, bing, bing, bing. But you can't get away from the politics. You can't get away from the unique circumstances that we might be in as a community, that all are different variables that feed into that same output, which is what is established as the budget. So, and certainly there's a certain amount of predictiveness to it. People are educated, providing their educated best guesses. That's what budgeting is 99% of the time to begin with. So, the idea of there being some sort of formula to some extent, and you can look at that if you look at those pie charts around like what types of services get funded, and where you see the biggest pieces of the pie. Maybe that's sort of a baseline of the formula, and everything sort of operates tinkering around the margins or moving the lines a little bit this way or a little bit that way, depending on what the service area need is of that time of that budget cycle. But those decisions are always fluid, and certainly, let me just add one last thing, is the saying it's political. It's even further politicized by this being the election year budget. So it's all part of it.
Great, thanks, Kieran. Darcie, are there any additions to that? No?
Nope. No.
Okay.
Said it all.
Great. Well, great discussion, everyone, and thank you so much for all your questions. I'm personally really happy that there were so many and lots of things for us to talk through. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us here today. Thank you, of course, to Darcie and Kieran for taking their time to both prepare this presentation and go a little bit over time with us as we chat through all these really important issues that are going to be coming into fruition in January. I also just want to say thank you on behalf of Engage as co-chair to the rest of our board members who helped plan. So Heather, Rachel, and Ashley for helping plan, and for Trevor, who's one of our great community volunteers who has been doing some of the moderation. Also, if you saw any social media posts about this over the last couple of days, that was Trevor doing all of that. So thank you so much to Trevor for helping us out in that capacity and for continuing to provide and to plan as we go into January. So again, just thanks so much, everyone. I think this was a great first outing. Looking forward to working with you in the new year as the budget gets released. Have a good afternoon. Any final words, Kieran, Darcie?
Thank you. It was really great to see so many people come out and stay for this amount of time on a subject that could be pretty dry. So,
so as well, by the way, Josh, you and the board, great job organizing.
Yeah, thank you.
Great job for all of the advocacy that you're doing. It's really important that the community be as engaged as we possibly can collectively in all of these conversations. So grateful for that work. Grateful for the opportunity. I want to wish everybody a safe and happy holiday season. All the best in 2026. Yes.
Yes. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Darcie. Just going to stop the
Talk to you
recording
soon.
here.